Hi, everybody, and welcome to Kathleen's interview. Today I'm talking to Claire Murray, and I'm really excited to delve into what she's been doing with her mysteries, how she got into it. Don't you want to know those things? Anyway, I think it's wonderful to try and figure out why somebody gets into a certain genre. So why don't we start with that, Claire? I I know a little bit about your background, that you used to be a ghostwriter and technical writer and did all kinds of websites and stuff like that. But how did you get into mysteries?
Because I read them. And that's why I also dabble or write fantasy and some science fiction, because those are the books that I read, and those were the books that called out to me and spoke to me. And then for many years, I was reading so many different mystery series that it made sense to start writing them, start writing mysteries. But my short stories, cover a range, and so even in my collection, there's some fantasy, you know, world origin kinds of stories and things like that. So it covers the gamut.
What kind of mysteries do you write? Do you write cozy mysteries? Do you write thrillers? Is it down and dirty and guts all over the place type writing, or
Well, there's nothing cozy about what I write. That's for sure. Some might not have, and most don't have blood and gore and things like that. But I don't consider them cozy. I consider them a little hard-edged. I think they reflect real life, and I realize people read cozies because they want to get away from that, and that's fine. But it's not me.
yeah, it,
So.
it's not me either. When I read a mystery, I want a mystery. I want to know the CSI stuff. I want to know how they do and how they find and what draws them. I've I watch almost nothing but mysteries. So,
Mhm.
but I read science fiction.
I would say mine border more on crime stories than mysteries, because you don't
Okay.
always have, my writing doesn't sit down and lay out a series of clues where the reader can follow along and figure it out. Often the antagonist is known, and it's more a matter of what is the protagonist going to do to deal with the antagonist. So there's workplace kinds of situations. Because I was a consultant for many years, I lived in literally tons of businesses for long periods of time, writing documentation and doing stuff like that. I saw all sorts of nasty, dirty stuff going on, and was often privy to information that employees didn't have, and knew more than some of them about the projects they were working on. So having sort of that inside ear to some of these things, I can apply them to the things that I write. Some of them come very close to real life, and sometimes I only find that out after I've written the story. And then when I'm digging in to do a little research for fine details, it's like, oh wow, I didn't know that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it mirrors what I had laid out had happened. And it's probably because I knew the organization so well that I was building the story from,
Mm-hmm.
so, and you'd have had to have worked there to know what the organization was, but sometimes it's there, you know.
Yeah, because it can be really hidden. I'm retired Air Force, and I saw some things that went on in different places. And my husband was a cop for most of his time in the service, and he saw a lot. He saw more than what most people would want to see.
Mm.
We had an air show at RAF Mildenhall, and we lost an Italian pilot. He crashed. And his head was separated from his body and his helmet.
Yeah.
And, people that were the farmers around thought, oh, souvenir, grab something. And somebody grabbed the helmet. My husband had to take it from him, saying, no. And then he showed him, and the kid got sick. But
Yeah. Oh, and he must have felt awful because he had no clue what was in it.
Yeah. But it's
real life can be very, very tough. And I had a friend one night. She scared me when she said, "Oh, I love to read your stories before I go to bed," because I thought the next line was going to be because they put me to sleep. But she said because they're always resolved at the end, and good wins out. And I thought, oh, that makes me feel much better than I thought you were going to say. But it's a way of writing. Righting wrongs. I saw a lot of wrongs in business and in the nonprofit world and life in general. And in your writing, you can set those situations up, and then you can right the wrong, and you can make people whole again. And that's what I like to do. So take people's real experiences and then try to turn it around so they come out in a better place.
Do you set the scene first, or do you build your character first?
Whatever I woke up with in my head that started the story. So I have a folder full of story ideas. I have a Scrivener file of stories that are started and being developed. And I even have a file of just story titles that come to my head that don't have a story behind them yet, but things that would make a good title. So I had a scene in my head for 10 years. This scene was there. All the action that happened was there. It was all developed, but I didn't have a story to go with it. I just had that scene in my head for 10 years. And when I started working on my first fantasy novel, that I knew that scene would go in that novel. And it took probably 10 chapters before it got to that scene, but I knew it would be there. I knew it would go into it. Other times I wake up and there's a character in my head, somebody who is just, half formed and waiting to be developed. And I'll start writing about that person and filling in some things and then take it from there. So I'm an organic writer. I don't sit down and plan out ahead what I'm going to create. I sit down and I start writing. I get an idea, I start writing, and then I look back on it and say, okay, where can I take this? And I look at my options and decide what direction I'll go in.
I can understand that because, well, I've always called myself a discovery writer. So it's organic. I get an idea and they just go. It just happens. The dialogue, the scenery, the whole bit, the world building. I have to keep lists around me for the different languages because I write science fiction. So they all have a language that I develop, and the religion and gods and all of that stuff. I mean, I have them in a program, but I also do it by hand. So if one's lost, I have the other.
Yeah. It's having backups is important.
Yeah. How long have you been writing fiction?
Seriously, writing fiction. It's been over 10 years now. The first novel I wrote, I have not published, but I think it's publishable. But I'm working on what should be, as I was thinking it would be the prequel, but it will end up being the sequel to it. So at some point I have to go back and work on that first one. And I wrote that in 6 months. And you and I both know it takes longer than that to write a novel, but I only had 6 months to get the novel laid out. And that was simply because on my birthday, I decided I'm going to write this book. And I have to finish it by December because in January tax season starts, and I ran my agency's free tax program, which meant many long days and closing up the shop at 11:30 at night and being back there at 10 the next morning to start my workday. So I did it, but now I want to go back and put that book through the paces of everything I've learned over these last 10 years and make it a really much better story.
I can understand that. I've had 4 careers, and when my last one destroyed my shoulders and I couldn't do it any longer, and I sat for a few months and I couldn't sit there anymore. I told my husband I was going to write a book, and he said, "Well, why don't you write a book?" So I did. And I wrote it in 45 days. It was 82,000 words. I hadn't had an English class in 50 years. And gave it to friends, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you wrote a book." And one friend finally said, "Kathleen, you need help." And I got help. I published 2 books, 2 novels before I published that one. That one finally got published December 29th of last year. So I absolutely understand. Now, you were saying that you write short stories. Do you do anthologies, or do you just do a collection for yourself? Are you?
I do both. I had several stories in Kings River Life magazine, very short stories. And then I started selling them into anthologies. So I'm in a half dozen or so anthologies. And then what I did is I pulled together some of my favorites from those, and also some new stories that hadn't been published yet. And I put out my collection, Play the Hand You're Dealt, because the stories cover such a broad range, but they're all about people just dealing with the hand they were dealt and figuring out how to move on from there. And sometimes they're the good guy and sometimes they're not.
Now, a question for you, because a lot of people talk about doing a collection. I am thinking about doing a collection because I've been writing anthologies since I started writing fiction in 2020. And I know anthologies that are not charity do not sell well. I mean, they don't make a lot of money. How do you feel the value is in doing a short story collection?
Well, first of all, it's all my stories rather than being mixed in with other people. And secondly, I have a little more control over it. So with the anthologies, what many places do is you get a reduced rate to buy, to buy the anthology. But a lot of places that's initially when the book is published. And when you run out of those books, you have to pay full price to get them to resell, so you don't make any money off them. So there's very little incentive for the authors to really push anthologies they're in, except for the initial release. My chapter, Desert Sleuths, what we do is we have an author rate, and we just maintain that author rate so that the authors of those anthologies can buy them again and again and again at that reduced rate, and they can sell them for a couple of bucks more and still make money. So that's what we do. And there's an anthology I'm in. The editor got the rights back from the original publisher, and it's going to be republished by another publisher. And I'm pushing for that kind of arrangement with them in terms of being able to buy them at less price, and especially where I sold my last copy, my last sales copy at the Tucson Festival this weekend. Because it's a great anthology. I love all the stories in it, and it's got a wonderful cover which really attracts people's eyes. So, and that's why it sells. So yeah, they don't sell as well as books, But with a collection, you know, and here's the other thing. There were people who came to the booth and said, well, are all the authors here, like for the anthologies? Well, I just said, across these 10 titles, there's like 55 different authors. So no, of course they're not all here right now. And she walked away disappointed because she couldn't buy a book and get everybody to sign it. There are some people out there that just want signed books. But if you have a collection and you're selling it, you can sign it, to that person. And some people really like that, really want that. So that's cool too. It's your book.
Yeah. Well, I found a way that when I do anthologies, because I run a team of authors that do anthologies, we're called the Transcendent Authors, that we put it through Draft Digital because they will separate out the funds and everybody gets 10%, a percentage depending upon how many authors are involved. We max out at 10, and the smallest we have is right now we're at 6 or 7 of us. So that percentage will break down that way. And they get put as contributors so that they can buy it at the wholesale price. Also.
Yeah. And that's good to have, to be able to do that.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find anybody else that'll do it that doesn't charge me extra for the accounting. Draft Digital doesn't.
Don't say it too loudly. They might change their mind.
Yeah, really. I know. I was going to ask you, because I know we're super excited. This is one of our speakers. Claire's one of our speakers for our upcoming conference. And I want her to just give you a little peek into what she's going to talk about.
Okay, well, my topic is building your story through plot and structure. And that sounds kind of boring, but really, if you want, when you think about what is storytelling, it's engaging someone in what happens to the people in your story. And if it's all mixed up, then you lose track of what's going on. So your plot is what happens to the characters in your story, the events and how they react to it. And so there should be a lot of action and reaction and things like that going on that keeps things moving. But your structure is how you arrange the elements of the story. Not just is it a chronological telling of what happened, but bringing in different pieces, like, why would somebody do this in the first place? Why would this character react that way? And so you have these little elements of backstory and things like that you can bring into it that help the reader understand the character's motives. So and then of course readers expect things to go along at a certain pace. But if it's just all the same pace the whole way through, it's like listening to a monotone, and that's no fun. So there have to be some ups and downs. There has to be some give and take. And the story, for every step forward, there's 2 steps back. And that sometimes happens, especially in your crime and mystery stories. Think about the detective who follows the clues and doesn't realize those clues are leading down a false trail, and then they got to go back to where they were before and take a new path. So structure helps you figure out how to do that. And when you pull those together and blend it, you have a real story that engages your reader and keeps them turning the page. And that's what we want to do as writers, is we want to keep them moving and moving and moving and invested and growing more invested in the story as they go along.
And I'm looking forward to listening to that and hearing that, because I'm venturing a little bit into mystery right now. But I always have a little bit of mystery in my stories, because there has to be something that they're going for. something to find or something to recover or repair or whatever, but something is missing and they have to find it and bring it in. So that's going to help me to hear that. It doesn't matter to me, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the business. You'll always learn something from someone who has worked in this, dedicated to it, and proven that they have an excellent track record in showing it by sales, and you do, which is
thank you.
why we're excited about having you come and meet everybody.
I'll have to say, I can't recall one science fiction or fantasy story I've read that didn't have a mystery as part of it. You know, the unknown is what keeps the reader, you know, oh, well, yeah, but I got to read on because I need to know what that's about, you know, and that's what's driving the characters, and that's what's driving the reader. So, yeah. And sometimes that's what's driving the writer because they haven't figured it out yet either.
Exactly.
You know, more writers say, I go where the story takes me, and sometimes I don't know where I'm going until I get there.
Yeah. I found that when I first started writing that I would get frustrated and I would have to get up and do something. And to empty my mind, I started baking to do that, because baking was just, you had to follow a recipe, that was it. And then it turned out that paid for my editors.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I love editors. I hate editors. Now,
they discipline us.
Yes, they do. But they sharpen us in that. I'm with a group that writes speculative fiction also. And I hadn't been with them for a while because they start their meetings at 8:00 at night. I'm up like you at 3:30 in the morning. And that makes for a very short night because we wouldn't finish until 1:00 in the morning. And so I quit going, and then I went back in the last few months and they said, oh my goodness, your writing has grown. And it's because of editors who have sharpened the pencil end of my brain.
That is great to hear, because I'm editing an anthology right now, and you know, we're working very hard with the authors to just, as you mentioned, level up. You know, take that story up a little level and make it stronger, sharper, clearer. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Now, is this a anthology that you're using to help teach the authors along with producing something good?
That is one of our goals, so we have a couple of authors who this will be their first publication or their first or second publication. And we, you know, we always want in our Desert Sleuth chapter, to try to help emerging writers get into that field of publication. But to make that happen, I created a program called Anthology Jam, and it's a 6-session, 2 hours each session program that we run the year before the anthology comes out, because we do every 2 years. And we did a pilot program 2 years ago, and then we did the program again this past year, but we put in new content with a little bit of a refresher from the original program, to focus on short story writing and to bring in a lot of the different aspects of what makes for good storytelling. There's, I mean, you could do a whole semester course on it and still not have completed it. But I really saw differences in people's writing with the stories that were submitted versus some of the sample writing and things we were seeing in the exercises in the course. So it really was clear people were paying attention and learning from it. So I think that was a good program. And now we want to take and combine the two, the pilot and the second program, and combine them into a stronger course for our members and perhaps for others as well. We'll decide on that. You know, it's something we could sell outside our own chapter.
Absolutely, because I think anthologies are something that are going to be needed more and more because they're short stories and the attention span of people has become smaller. It has tightened up. I started anthologies and short stories because I found out my dad had adult ADD and he couldn't read anything longer than a magazine article without becoming frustrated, antsy, pacing, or falling asleep. So, and I had several friends that had suffered severely with cancer, things like, and other medical issues, and couldn't hold a book a long time. Even a Kindle, they couldn't hold it for very long. So this was a way that they could read a story and finish it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I started writing short stories to improve my long stories. And now my long stories keep getting interrupted with all the stupid short stories I'm writing. I woke up a couple days ago with a whole new story in my head, and I had to sit down and just get the gist of it out so I can go back to it later and actually create a story around it. And it's like, but darn it, I'm supposed to be working on this.
Oh, I know. And my short stories sometimes turn into novellas. So it's because I just can't.
The suspense fantasy I'm working on right now. I had a fantasy short story and I had published it. And then I decided that I could do more with that story, and I thought I'd turn it into a novella. And as a short story, it was about 7,000 words. So I said, well, let me turn it into a novella, you know, and got to 20,000 words and then 30,000. And of course, as you're going along, because it's in the fantasy realm, you have a lot of world building to do. There were the societal, the religious, the political aspects, plus the world itself. What's it like and what type of society? You know, it's a sort of a feudal, semi-feudal kind of area on a different planet. So, you know, you're not tied to Earth structures. And, you know, when I got to 40,000 words, I said, I think it's going to be a novel, not a novella. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the 72 to 75,000 range now, and still adding another layer. And it was in I was taking a course with Simon Wood a year and a half ago, and he was talking for a few minutes about suspense and how suspense works. And I thought, you know, it just struck me that, you know, this story was moving along. Okay. And, you know, remember I talked about the ups and downs. I said, and it's all from one point of view, a close third person point of view of the main character. And I realized that if I added another point of view from the perspective of the people that I knew were going to try to stop her from meeting her goal, but brought that in earlier, and then just every 3 or 4 or 5 chapters, bring in a chapter from one person's point of view from that group, it could be a suspense, because now the reader knows it's actually being done, but she doesn't know what's being done to prevent her from reaching her goal. And it really let me add so much depth to the story. And now it's a story with more human emotion and warmth and insight than it had before. And it was just that little trigger from that course I took, just one discussion he was having about suspense, and I realized this should be a suspense fantasy. And that brings it into the mystery world, because now it isn't just fantasy, it's a suspense fantasy.
Mm-hmm. That's your forte. I have one more question for you. If you had one thing that you could tell someone who was just beginning to write, what would you advise them?
Keep writing. Then rewrite it. And rewrite it again. Mercedes Lackey, who is one of the people, that fantasy writers I like, she says you have to write 1,000,000 words, write till your hands bleed before you have anything that's publishable. And I know what she means. She's a little harsh on people, but the idea is what you think is good today, a month from now, when you go back and reread it, and if you've been reading other things and you've been doing anything to study what is good craft, you'll recognize that, I could turn that phrase around, I could do this, I could do that. So keep writing, write what you enjoy, but take a few risks, do something a little different, and learn. We're never too old to learn. So learn. I still take courses. I teach, I take courses, I learn just from talking with people, and your friends will tell you they love it, and that's great because that bolsters your ego. But find somebody who doesn't love it, but says, there's something here to work with, let's make it work.
Yes. I think that's very sage advice for everyone, no matter where you are in your writing career, because we can forget that. It's, it is a due process. One of my dear friends, and you know her, Paula Winsky, she says, you got to sit your butt in a chair and write. If you don't, you have nothing to edit. You have nothing to give anybody. It's got to start with writing, and it continues with writing all the way through.
My phrase is writing is rewriting. And I was working, I spent 2 hours on a story this morning that was already completed. But there were a couple of suggestions that the ending was rushed. And I wanted to take the last part of the story and put it in present tense. The whole first part of the story is in the past, but then I wanted to bring it into the present tense. So I had done that work a few days ago, but I spent 2 hours this morning just going through and putting finishing touches and just looking at it. And I said, this paragraph, it flows better if this paragraph is before this one. But you have to have had some distance from when you wrote it to be able to give it that critical eye. Because now I'm not sitting back as the author, I'm sitting back with my editor hat on saying, how's the reader going to feel about this? How will it flow for them? What engages them? And now I just sent it back out after I was done this morning, sent it back out to an editor friend who's going to look at it again and give me her feedback again, because I already got original feedback from her before I submit it.
And I think that's so intelligent. I don't know how many times I've had editors on my Dream Brights, the one I published on the 29th. And each time something was found, each time. And I think that sometimes we could actually go too far, because their perfectionism is not what you want, but you want a story that will pull them in and hang on to them, and they can't let go. They will stay up all night reading them, because I used to do that. I still do. Shh, don't tell anybody.
Whose book did I start? I read 25% of the book one night. Oh, it was, believe it or not, as much as I don't write cozies, I do sometimes read them, and I write book reviews for Kings River Life magazine. And they had asked me to review Lois Winston's, and I had already reviewed two previous books of hers. I like her writing. She's very humorous, and it doesn't have some of the pitfalls of some of the cozies that are just too many words, too much repetition. He got up and walked over to the counter and did this, I mean, it's not done like that. It's much crisper writing. And so I sat down and I read 25% one night. And the next night, I think it was a Friday night, I sat down and I read the whole rest of it. It just kept, and it was like, I don't want to stop because I'm really enjoying it. It's not that I have to finish it to write the review because it was still 2 weeks ahead of the review, when the review was needed, but I was enjoying my time in the book. And that's what you want to do for your reader. You want them to enjoy the time in your book, even when it's scary, even when it's rough or tough, that they, as one of my, in one of the critique groups I'm in, one person always says, this is where I really felt your character. This is where I really connected with that character, and it drew me right more into the story, and that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to end this at this note because I want you all to come to the conference and be in her class and get to meet her and pick her brain one-on-one. How does that sound? At the end of this show, you will see some banners come up, and they will have Claire's information on how to contact her and where she will be. So thank you, Claire. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you next time on Kathleen's Interviews.
Thank you, Kathleen. And